Testing mic, 1, 2, 1, 2.
A mic is high enough for me to speak. So thank you very much for attending the Fiber Forum this morning. We have Stanford de Jong that will present on and looks at the challenges in building maps of South Africa and the many different fiber networks, reveals some interesting facts about the concentration and coverage of networks across the nation. Stanford? Stanford de Jong has more than 2.5 decades in the geospatial industry, and he's still going strong. Welcome this morning.
Barely going strong. Good morning, all. Lovely to see all these faces. I know a couple of them, which is pretty great. And nice to meet you in person. Thank you for attending this morning. And there we go. I wanted to know where that is. The funny thing is, there was beers for peers today, or last night, should I say. I was just wondering, what's the turnout going to be like? Even with a good turnout, which is a good turnout, you go to sleep and you wake up and your Garmin tells you that you've had a pathetic sleep. So I've got a sleep score which is useless. But there we go. That's technology influencing even your sleep these days. Right. Who am I? There we go. My name is Stanford from 28 East. We're a geospatial company, and we are also a Google Maps partner, but we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about some of the analysis that we are able to perform geospatially in order to understand what is going on in the F&O markets. Having said that, there are some important distinctions to make and some important understandings of the data before understanding the analysis. So that's what essentially I'm going to be touching on, is understanding what data we have analyzed and as a result, what are the results. But I can't go on without actually just touching on some of the interesting technologies, Google technologies out there that we can rely on, make use of in the markets, and get ISPs to make use of as well. So immersive maps, and I love this one. We had a bit of our developers doing some immersive mapping, and here comes 28 East in the aeroplane down to Cape Town. It's the wrong route, I realize that, but anyway, we can't all be, we don't know the flight paths down into Cape Town International Airport. But anyway, that's us, and that is some of the immersive mapping that we can make use of as solutions for internet service providers. I wish there was some dramatic music for this. Wouldn't that be nice? But there isn't. And in addition to, okay, it looks like we're going to have to get to the end of the little video before I can go to the next one. So I think you get it. The next one is optimization, route optimization, useful for internet service providers, optimizing and optimizing routes for technical teams, for example, distributing and getting technical teams to and from sites, operational sites. That is a Google optimization tool that we can make use of. Advanced markers as well. Just interesting that at a particular point, we can actually introduce some customized labeling. There is also, from a Google perspective, something called, a big focus on environmental, and this is one of the little, we call it the Solar API, which is probably quite useful for internet service providers, understanding, power is a driver, and the understanding of solar potential for particular sites is useful for service providers, and an API that can be relied on also from Google. But this is where we really want to focus our attention. And it's the ISPA Insights. Right, finally I've got a map and I feel a whole lot more comfortable as well. Ant has approached 28 East and they said, well, listen, you've got geospatial experience. Let's see what we can do with the data that we have access to. So what is the data that we have access to? Access, I use that quite loosely, but because because we are an integrator of F&O network data, in order to allow a service provider to query an address and find out what service is available at that address or at that point on the map, a pin on the map, we have access to the F&O data. Not all of the data, it is only client or data that should we say, data that are part of the underlying service that we offer to ISPs. So the ISPs will sell on a service provider, on a provider. We have that data. So a service provider can say, okay, what is the address? And hence we do a geospatial query behind the scenes and identify whether there is a service in a particular area. By aggregating that data, we then are able to make use of that data source to do this analysis. So what we have for the spatial analysis, we have the footprints in polygons, lines as well. And then to make sense of the footprints, I mean, we could just map out the footprints and look where there would be colorful spots, as you can see on the map. But that really doesn't make sense because that's just a footprint, and so what? What does that actually represent? Or how do you take that analysis further? You take that analysis further, the answer is by introducing data such as, what's ubiquitous in South Africa as far as data goes that we could make use of? And he's miming the word right here. Thanks, Ant. Census data. So we match, well, no, we don't match at all. We mix, we layer. We layer the census data, which was over the entire South African extent, and we overlay the fiber network operator's footprint on top of the census data and extract further information, which is interesting. Well, should we say the interesting part of that is we, in terms of analyzing or extracting out as much information as possible, we've made use of the areas of the census boundaries. Okay, so the census boundaries are enumeration areas. They roll up into larger and larger areas, all quite nicely nested, so it's quite nice and neat data. And we have decided to use something called the subplace, which is essentially the suburbs, and it's most people understand a suburb, like, okay, I'm in Irene at the offices, and I know more or less the extent of Irene, and you kind of like got a concept of understanding, spatial understanding. So we used the subplace and the area of the subplace, and we intersected the footprints of the fiber network operator with the area of the subplace. And that's the initial basis of the analysis that we did. And that introduces some interesting insights, but there's a cautionary tale there as well. And the cautionary tale is, you could probably spot a couple of the cautionary tales in this diagram that you see, well, actually in the map that you see in front of you. So, the map that we have in front of us, first of all, there we go, 37.4% of South Africa is covered by fiber based on area. Okay, based on area, that's an important thing. It is not 37.4% of South Africa is covered in terms of population densities or anything like that. Okay, so it's not on the population, though there can be some interpretation because we've used the census numbers in that. Okay, so what do we have here? No, actually maybe I'll take a step back, or should I take a step forward? Let's just change that view. Okay. So I think everyone would probably instinctually know that areas like the Western Cape and Gauteng have a large number of operators in that area, in that space. And it is true. Gauteng, 86.13% of the physical area is covered or intersected by a network, by a footprint, by some sort of provider. In this particular diagram, I'm going to now just dive into a little bit more of the details. On the right, can you actually, you can maybe just see that. The darker colors, 7 providers right at the bottom of the legend. You can see central Gauteng, Joburg, Pretoria area, at least covered with at least 4 provider options or choices, I suppose. And then there is a cautionary tale there, so I'm going to just remember that. So Gauteng, 86.13, and we go to where we are at the moment. Western Cape. Does that look kind of like, if you had to see that, the map there, you can see the dark colors representing high numbers of providers deep in the Western Cape. On the borders on the Eastern Cape there as well, there seems to be quite a lot of activity, 3 providers. Does that kind of resonate with expectations? I would imagine so. Right, from well-serviced areas to very unserviced areas. And unfortunately, we've got little Eastern Cape sitting there with not too much options as far as providers go. So ISPA have, here we can see one, they say, oh, goodness gracious, now what on earth is going on here? Because here we've got, to the west of Klerksdorp is that little dot on the east side there. On the west side, no, sorry, it's right in the center of this particular map. What on earth is going here? Here we have a rural area in Klerksdorp with a massive number of providers, and this is where the cautionary tale comes in. No, there's not 7 providers, or at least 4 providers in this rural area. There's a combination of data issues that we get to that is unfortunate, gives you just a bit of a skewed picture. In fact, in this case, a very skewed picture, where the combination of the large areas of the census data overlapped with the network operators introduced a display back or a result of an analysis that is incorrect. And that is due to, in part, the census data polygons, and in part to the fiber network operators' data. We don't clean the data, we don't manipulate the data, we receive that data in, I'd say 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10 in the KML file format, and we are overlapping those KML files. Now, KML files is it's a blessing and a curse, I've got to be honest. It's a blessing in that they are ubiquitous. It's used in this particular industry a lot. However, it's really just a display. There's no spatial topology built into it. That's a big geospatial word, which helps improve the accuracy of the data. So we're overlapping many layers or KML files on top of the spatial data, and we've got what we call these slivers, we've got these overshoots, we've got these undershoots that presents itself in the data. So in the middle of Klerksdorp there are footprints of at least 4 operators, but because those little boundaries creep into the urban areas, or at least that very large rural area, it then transfers that data or that understanding into the large rural polygon, census polygon. So, cautionary notes. You can't take these maps as is, and this is just a little bit of the more detailed example. It might be a little bit of a messy slide, but it is saying that there are cases in points where we're overlapping the footprint data from the FNOs, and we get 63 overlapping instances of the data. Crazy. That's a whole lot of another policy discussion. It is a data issue, and it's probably an item of discussion that ISPA would have to address, which I'm looking forward to hearing about. So just as an aggregator of the data, this is what 28 East are involved in. What do we do? What is the value proposition of using 28 East in order to do a feasibility query at an address, at a point on the map? Is behind the scenes, our little data warriors are requesting, receiving KML files. KML files is great because it's ubiquitous, as I said, but whew, I was hearing horror stories even last night about using KMLs in network management and understanding straight line networks, and if you don't get it right, you can be kilometers away from your town, village, or address, and those designers who are unfamiliar with scale can get it horribly wrong, and we do see that. But 28 East do not edit that. We use it as is. CSV is points and polygons, or points shape files, which is at least at a file format, and it's a geospatial file format. It's also a little bit old these days, but there is something called topology, which helps to define logic built into the shape, the spatial feature. We love those geodatabases as well. We've actually even taken images, snapshots, and lines drawn on snapshots. I mean, lines hand-drawn onto images, and we've had to use that as a data source. Can you imagine the amounts of error and inaccuracies that we introduce into the FNO footprint data, if you wish, and how that is, the repercussion of that comes through in the analysis. As we go forward, I think there's this tendency to make use of API access to spatial data, and we will see probably more of that. Really, and that is, oh, beautifully, my little story. And here's my little chappie who has a question for me. Do you know him? Have you seen him? No? Yes? Where do you know him from? Well, maybe you would have, but he certainly is a train spotter, and that's his train spotting face, and I thought it was a brilliant train spotting face. And that was my closing slide, and that was my question slide. So, over to you. Any questions? I actually can hear a cricket in the corner. I really can. Okay, I've got a question. Can I have a question? My question to the audience, and ISPA as well, is, so what else could we do with the data? Right. And that's the question I'd love to hear from you guys. It's awesome that you brought that one up. The additional work we would love to see is the fact that the footprints change almost weekly. So what you see here is a snapshot in time, and happens to be in November last year, but that changes, and we know that every week there's a weekly update, small as it is, but I would love to see that mapping as an ongoing process and seeing or monitoring the change in the footprint penetration into, well, rural areas in particular, but I'd love to see that happen. So, and that can happen. So that's one of the nice questions that I would, that I have now addressed, and hopefully satisfied your query as well. Anything else?
Hi, there you go. Okay, Graham here from the internet. I had a question which you kind of answered already about, I mean, looking particularly at the national map, there was a lot of rural areas that showed a provider, and I know that there's no infrastructure in those areas. So, I mean, you're mapping it onto census areas. That's principally why it's showing up. Is that what you're saying? I mean, in the Eastern Cape, for example, I
Yep.
mean, there's fibre in the metros. There is no fibre beyond about 20 kilometres out of the metros. So you've got like a 50-kilometre radius
Yep.
showing up there. Is that purely the census boundaries, or?
No, that is actually a very good point, is that we mapped what analysis was what 28 East has access to, and it was open fiber only. So there may be closed fiber routes in there as well, but we only mapped what we have and open fiber. So it might be that we don't have access to that footprint, and hence we can't map it.
So what I'm suggesting is that what you're showing there is not real. And I suspect that some of the data you have has aspirational coverage rather than real coverage.
Yeah.
And I think maybe as an ESPA discussion, what is the definition of coverage? Because, I mean, I've seen some of the maps that some of the FNOs put on their websites,
Sure.
which includes lots of aspirational coverage, lots of like blankets an entire an entire district as having coverage when they actually only have
Sure.
a pop in town, and they can do
Absolutely.
5 kilometers
Yeah.
around the pop in town.
Yeah.
So I think that's the one concern about kind of just looking at the data and going,
Yes.
lots of people have got coverage already, and I think the reality is a lot less.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed about the data was that you showed a lot of places where people have 7 options, and I was wondering how you got to that. Is that an individual at a specific location has 7 options, or are there just 7 options that are present in that polygon?
Yeah, exactly. It's your point 2 there, or your latter point, is if we had a polygon and there was an operator on the east side, west side, and a little intersect, so a tiny little sliver of intersects, we count that as operator 1, operator 2, operator 3. So that's how we got to that 7, yes. And that's how we counted it. But what an addition to that is that we can't actually say that operator 2 at the top on the north is actually correctly positioned. So it might be more north or might be more south, and we don't have any control over that particular line. But it had to be counted because it is there in our footprint data set.
Yeah, I mean, I think practically the reality of what's on the ground is that I don't know of too many places where there's more than 2 options realistically
Right.
for home users.
Right.
And then obviously there's the distinction between home services and business services, which also need to kind of be looked at separately, because you certainly can't
Absolutely.
go to one of the FTTB ISPs and go, please plug in my house, because they might laugh at you, or they might just send you a quote that you're going to
Good
fall
point.
over. And so it's a good starting point. I think that's taking that data wider and potentially like putting it in front of policymakers and things,
Yes.
it's a bit premature, because it creates an impression that we are a lot further along than I think we are in reality.
Yeah, and I think, well, exactly that. But I also don't want to throw out the baby with the water. So I think you're right, it is a starting point, and it's been acknowledged as a starting point. And by addressing the complications of that data, if you address those complications, you kind of realize with circumspect or with caution that you address that image as is. Thanks for those comments, yeah. On switch, the on switch. Yeah. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, William Stuckey, independent consultant. I have a very similar question. What do you define as coverage? If there's a piece of fiber here, whether it's backhaul fiber or whatever, how do you define that there is coverage here or there or not there?
We define it by what the KML is telling us. So the KML from the fiber network operator is what we've mapped and if it is on the left-hand side of the street, that is our definition of their footprint.
So it's their data.
It's their
They
data.
are claiming
We
that they
do
have
not
coverage.
touch their data. We do not touch it. We do not modify it. We do not add it into a geodatabase and introduce ideas of topology where there shouldn't be overlaps, there shouldn't be slivers, there shouldn't be overshoots in the data, undershoots in the data, which all contributes to spurious data sets. So it is exclusively what we get from the fiber network operator.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then Graham's point of aspirational maps may well be the case.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Point taken. Come, Mark.
I'm saying, so if you're, I mean, I'm an F&O, so on the route, what you're not depicting is the accessibility to that fiber. And that's probably what your
Yeah.
point is. So if it's an NLD route, or these are not accessible to anything that's going past that until it reaches a town or somewhere it can spur off. So that overlapping is what's happening.
Thanks, Mark.
Sort of just tying together some of the questions here. There's F&Os in the room. What advice would you give them about how they should provide you with data to serve your customers better, which is ultimately their customers?
Yeah.
What should that data look like?
Yeah. That's a good one and a tricky one, because I don't want to put my foot in it. But as I said, those KMLs are ubiquitous. They're easy to use. They come from all the F&Os. And I'm from a geospatial background, and I believe that an ideal approach would be to have a geodatabase. So it's a database that understands, it sounds a bit conceptually warped, but understands that I'm on the left-hand side of the road, I'm on the right-hand side of the road, I'm overlapping or I'm snapping to a particular line segment, and there is something called topology that is built into the data repository, into the database. So that would be my my option number one for any ISP to actually make use of geospatial databases to capture the network footprint, and which in turn allows for the combination, or at least the addition or aggregation, should we say, aggregation of the network operator's data into a single data repository that has these rules built into it. And we can see that we don't have all these KMLs sitting on top of each other, all higgly-piggly, as spaghetti or as overlaps, and we can trim that spaghetti mess out and have a single line. Single line represents maybe 2 or 3 operators as an attribute to that line. So that would be my great ambition for any F&O, is to make use of geospatial concepts such as a topologically correct database. Thanks for that.
Hey, Joe from Atomic.
Hi, Joe.
Touching on that point about 7 coverage or 7 options in one area, sort of, can you differentiate between FTTH and FTTB, the sort of easy option to get access to a home versus the long formal quote process?
No, answer is no.
Okay. Because what I'm interested in is, of the FTTH areas, what percentage have more than one option?
Yeah, okay, so that would be a continuation of the analysis, which we haven't actually done. So we aggregated all together, B and H, and that could be an extension of this analysis, ISPA's analysis, is to separate out B and H. So we could do that, yeah. Thanks. Alrighty. Well, with the sleep score of only 59, I feel quite chirpy about this, I've got to be honest. And I think, thank you very much. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Metro Fiber panel discussion. Can I invite the panel members up, please? First, we have David Coleman from Frogfoot, data analytics and data science professional with more than 20 years experience in credit risk management, predictive analytics, data management, data science, and product development. He has served various industries, amongst others, banking, finance, services, retail, online gaming, and telecommunications sector across sub-Sahara Africa and the Middle East. Welcome. Second, we've got Mike Silver from Liquid Telecoms. Mike is the Chief Regulatory Officer of the Liquid Intelligence Technologies Group, a lawyer and ISPA fanboy, having been an ISPA regulatory advisor and board member. He currently does various things to try and make the internet a better place. Mike tries very hard to make law, regulations and policies not so boring, and in his own words, he sometimes succeeds. Mike. There you are. Mark O'Donoghue from Link Africa. Mark has been in the ICT sector for over 25 years. Are you okay? He is currently works at Chief of Sales at Link Africa, a South African-based F&O with international ambitions. Christian Woods from Metro Fiber. Christian is the Chief Commercial Officer of Metro Fiber Networks, and he is accountable for all revenue-generating business. Jan Vermeulen from My Broadband. He's the editor of My Broadband, the largest tech news website. He has a degree in computer engineering from the University of Pretoria, and has always had a love of writing, with dreams that he would be living out the 1995 occult film Hackers. He joined My Broadband in 2010 as a junior journalist. The real work of journalism has a rude awakening, but he fell in love with it in any way, and it's been 14 years of history. Anton Kotze from Ellipsis. Anton is an admitted attorney with over 20 years of post-admission experience. He is a director of Ellipsis Consulting, law firm MCK Inc., and providing legal and regulatory services to the telecommunications sector. Anton currently serves as a regulatory advisor to the Internet Service Providers Association with Dominique Cole. Welcome, everybody. Am I in your way? Not yet. If you wouldn't mind, I'll kick off the first question from the Operators Working Group. Sol Stein asked, everyone expects internet costs to decrease, yet year on year the F&O's prices increase, justified by an increase in speed. This means that the ISP also have to charge more due to delivering more bandwidth. We have that most people have enough bandwidth at home and would rather keep the same speed for a smaller increase. Why the drive to push up the price and speed when you should be getting volume breaks to pass on to the consumers? Who would like to answer this question? Thanks.
Thanks. Look, I mean, the prices generally, and we are seeing it in the media, the company I work for hasn't increased for a while, a couple of years. But, I mean, I'm going to put this down to generally that the cost to service from the F&O side is definitely increasing significantly. We understand that the optic layer, there's been huge progression in the amount of bandwidth that can be delivered over the same fiber, but the actual physical layer, or the layer one portion, to service, to keep uptime, to stave off load shedding. One of our big cost increases that we've seen massively is the actual physical security of our staff in mainly KZN. We're up to nearly R1 million a month now just on physical security, where people have to be escorted by armed security forces with automatic weapons just to go into the rural areas. So these costs are coming through to us constantly. The ability for us to keep our network up due to load shedding is also another factor that we've had to put into the running of our business. And generally, when you look at how the companies that have tried to keep the pricing down, etc., what has been the impact to the service delivery? The ability to actually keep that fiber alive, the turnaround times, the ability to meet an MTTR. This requires people. This is physical hands. And we constantly are being pressurized and paying for things that quite technically we shouldn't be paying for, quite frankly. I mean, we shouldn't be having to do so much uptime on generators and batteries, and we should not be having to pay armed security to go and deliver and fix a fiber in a remote area. That's costing us now, we're a small company, R1 million extra a month. Where does that go? We would shut down if we didn't eventually put our pricing up. So the optics layer is the easy one. You've got all these, we've been watching this for the last 3 days, just how much bandwidth we can be pushing over these fibers now. So that's why the offset happens at the increase of bandwidth level.
Thank you very much.
Well, can I maybe offer an additional perspective, which is maybe because people actually underpriced as part of the land grab, and people went in at pricing that was not commercially viable in order to actually get uptake of fiber, and now the market grab is coming home to roost, and people are realizing they're having to raise their prices to actually be commercially viable. And the only way to soften the blow, in much the same way as when people pack your ketchup in a smaller bottle for the same price, is you can't pack your packets in a smaller bottle. So what you do is you tell the consumer, we're charging you more, but wow, look, we're giving you greater speeds or greater capacity to try and soften the blow. But I think that the comment from the operator working group is correct. Most people have enough bandwidth. But really, this is the F&Os trying to give the consumer something rather than just a price increase with no perceived benefit coming across.
Anel, I think this is a topic that deserves multiple answers. I think it's a hot topic, so maybe let me give my view. And 2 points. I think you're right. I think we as F&Os were quite aggressive at some point. And with all costs going up, interest rates going up, I think it's exactly that. The payback is not where it should be, and therefore increase of prices at a reasonable level, and we also pushed it out for as long as possible, is I think natural. And I think we are an industry for decades actually. There was only one way, which is prices should reduce, right? Any other industry, it's absolutely accepted that prices increase. And even in close to our industry, all the over-the-top players like Netflix increases prices. Are we speaking about it? I just got an email from Google yesterday actually that my prices go up as a person. I'm not speaking about it apart from here. That's accepted. But if we as an industry increase prices for internet access, which is a utility these days, people are speaking about it like, how can you? I think we must also be real about it. And there are a lot of discussions about net neutrality and over-the-top players versus the telco players that put billions of euros there in the ground. And I think also regulation now comes to at least in Europe, comes to a point to say, yeah, maybe we need to actually also give some space and some room to breathe for the telco players that actually invest billions to make broadband possible. And a lot of over-the-top players are just free riding. So this debate, I think we don't have yet in South Africa, but maybe it's also time to have it. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, if I may, on this. The minimum price for suburban networks seems to be 500 to 600 rand. What's informing that? Like, what's the minimum ARPU that's needed to actually, make the business profitable and sustainable and successful? That's obviously the suburban networks, and then how much of an impact do the high-density, low-income urban areas have? The ARPUs there are obviously much lower. I think that would also be quite interesting, because it seems it's not that the prices necessarily go up, it's that the minimum price just stays at the same level, which is 500 to 600 rand.
So I think it comes down to density, and so what that means is essentially our ARPUs or our IRR that we've deemed to be feasible comes down to where we're actually putting the fiber in. So this is why there's so much overbuild at the moment, is people are now seeing that you have to have a concentration of X to be able to make that backhaul fiber viable. So what we're seeing is, on average, if we were to be the only provider in a shopping center, and regardless of whether you have 3, 4 providers in a shopping center, the maximum uptake in that shopping center is about 34%, 35%. Everybody else, so your anchor tenants, your Woolworths, your Checkers, all of these guys, they will now purchase your Ethernet layer, your more expensive. You're all backhauling on the same, routes, if I can put it that way, whether you're going into a GPON or is what is it's being determined actually by what is the business willing to pay. And even when you go into the other 60-odd%, that's all sitting on the mobile networks. That's all being taken up by $2.99, $1.99 packages, because all of these shops essentially just need a POS that is working off a 5G or a 4G SIM. So we actually get no traction in that. So we don't have, the numbers work out that you're not going to go above 34, maybe 40% if you're lucky, inside a shopping center that has a high density. So what the maths then comes down to number of shops and what is the backhaul cost, and that's all averaging out at about 500, 600. Just a note on this, the 500, 600 is now actually becoming even a standard for some of the largest retailers in the country. I go back 25 years in this industry, and 20 years ago at Dimension Data IS, I was selling to some of the largest retailers 25,000 Rand a month per link. Okay, per link into stores, 1,500 stores, 2,000 stores across the country. Now these same businesses that have got a set revenue at 25,000 Rand times 1,000 or 1,500 stores are now getting traded off at 600 Rand a store. What is the expectation of the industry? What is the expectation that an FNO can survive where they're asking, how is 600 Rand now too expensive to run a retail store that is sitting, so say they've got the option of 2 fibers, so they're going 600 Rand, so it's 1,200 Rand. They put a little MicroTik device down, or an SD, if they want to go big, they go SD-WAN. It can cut over 2 FNOs, 2 separate routes. They've got the redundancy. I think people need to start thinking a lot longer term here is about the survivability of the FNO, because if the FNOs can't make it, no one's going to make it. The ISPs simply just won't make it. Where does it end?
If I could maybe just add something. So I think there's probably different dynamics. So I think in FTTH, it's definitely an inflationary environment that we're looking at. And as previous guys said, we are seeing that pressure coming through on the cost side for us. Sorry? Yeah. Better? Okay. Okay. But what we, as you know, from our side, what we're doing is we've got both a H as well as a fiber to the business operation. So I think what we're doing consciously is on the business side, you're seeing different dynamics. Actually, prices are coming down on that side. And you do have, from that perspective, as well as financing our expansion on the H side into the rural areas, there's a cross-subsidization factor you need to look at there. If you look at some of the studies we've done, 50 to 60% penetration, if you now have, let's say, 3 operators in an area, you're probably looking at a terminal penetration of between 20 and 30%. And we know that in a lot of areas, we're looking at 4 to 5, then it drops to like 13 to 15%. So it's a viability issue.
Definitely an operational aspect to keep in mind. Anybody with questions?
Hi, my name's Alan Levine. I'm from Vanilla ISP. We work with a dozen FNOs. I think there's a big aspect of admin that comes into price changes, whether it's the FNO or the ISP or the user. It affects everybody. It adds a huge overload. I'm not sure if you're taking that all into account. If the FNO's got good admin, then, you know, that's great. You've got capacity to add prices. But when line transfers are failing all over the place and it takes 3 weeks for responses on installations and stuff, I think it's a little bit maybe not the best time to do price changes in those days. The thing that concerns me the most as an ISP is that it's really the fiber industry against the mobile industry. And it's very easy for a single user to switch from fiber to mobile, especially with the prices coming down in mobile. The MVNOs and bigger data bundles are much more easily accessible and lower cost. And there's no fixed line fee. You're really paying the ISP only. So please, when you look at your price increases, let's work together, because it's us against them, and we're actually in the same boat, and we're the good guys. So just be careful of those guys.
Good morning, William Stuckey, independent consultant. Comparing 25,000 Rand 20 years ago to 600 Rand today is comparing apples with pears. The 600 Rand is provided over your own fiber. Previously, the 25,000 Rand was provided over Telkom's infrastructure, and most of the money went to them.
Just to Alan's point, I think the interchangeability with the mobile service and the fiber service is certainly what's driving the Competition Commission's concern in the Maziv matter before the tribunal. So it's a very valid point, and it's a point that the Competition Commission has taken up. And we'll see what comes out of the tribunal on that.
Maybe 2 points. So one was mobile versus fiber. I think it's a good point. For me, it is very, very clear that, and I worked 20 years on the mobile side. For me, it's very, very clear that for a static use case, so your home, your workplace, wherever you are static, I think in the long run, fiber is the superior technology. And I truly believe that we need to enable all the use cases, and the devices that gets added to your fiber at the home, in your home, is increasing every day with cameras, etc. So I think there are use cases that big pipes to the home are required, and this is seen across the globe. So, but there's also a very good use case for mobile. I mean, we all, when we are on the move, we have to have mobile. So I believe that will coexist. Honestly, I think for the ISPs, it's actually an opportunity to provide converged services more and more across mobile and fixed. That's what ISPs can do and bundle it. So I believe there is an opportunity of the two. Maybe let me respond to your admin point. I think you have a point, but honestly it's a bigger issue that we as an industry have, because I believe we are a tech industry, if you like, so that the admin actually is no longer required because it's automated and digitized. That's my point on that one.
If I can just respond, I don't think you're actually getting it. Vodacom's the most expensive mobile operator, so I'm not so, obviously the massive merger thing is a big competition thing, but Vodacom's the most expensive mobile operator. And MTN seems to be the closed fiber network. I don't think I get to see them very much, but they also have all kinds of MVOs on their mobile network. So, and we have RAID. So in a city environment, like my staff, the ones that won't come to work, they actually will prefer using a RAIN than a fiber. I pay for that. It freaks me out. I'm totally with you. Obviously, fiber's way better. You don't have to sell us on that. We know we're in the right space, but they're trying to get into our space, and they're succeeding. And I don't have a way to fulfill their needs using fiber. So you're not empowering us. I would much rather have 2 pieces of fiber going in for redundancy than have an LTE backup service. I don't want to have an LTE backup service, not nearly as good. This overbuild idea, it's not an overbuild. It's competition. It's like, there's an opportunity. Vumatel's in that area. They really give terrible customer service. Let's go in there and grab that area because there's a lot of money to be made there.
That's right, but still, I think the arguments are still valid that we cannot sell at the cost and at the price that makes it impossible to invest further. So I believe just selling cheap is not the answer for the industry. So we need to be very clear that we have a superior product, and the superior product must come as a superior price. If not, the industry will go the wrong way. And that's exactly the point that has been made here. Yes, I agree with you. Of course, mobile is a good alternative. As I said, I worked for both companies you mentioned. But at the end, fiber is superior, gives the better service, and we need to sell this service to our end customers and establish it in the market that there is a price to pay for this service. If not, we are going the wrong way.
Well, let me be contrarian again. So isn't the answer then to actually welcome consolidation in the industry, because the only thing that is going to provide an alternative is consolidation? And if consolidation is going to be necessary because you actually need to reduce some of the inefficiencies, you need to allow for cross-subsidization, then it means that if you're going to be pushing consolidation within the ISP and F&O space, then it means that the ability to object or the intent to object to consolidation within the mobile and fixed space is reduced. But maybe that's the answer, is take out the inefficiencies by just integrating. Let the F&Os buy the ISPs, remove this whole open access concept that we've got, because that way you can actually push margins up. And those few ISPs who want to continue within their space can do so, but they're aware that they're going to be facing significant competition between bundled F&O ISPs that are squeezing every cent out of the ARPUs that they earn. Because otherwise, Alan's right, mobile will eat our lunch, because consumers largely focus on price before they focus on quality.
I think consolidation is going to happen anyway, whether we welcome it or not. I think there's a lot of players that don't have the scale and probably would have built on business cases that were based on wrong assumptions. And I think that's key to what you were saying about the underpriced model. I don't think it was on purpose. I think it was just business models that were perhaps they overestimated the take-up they would have in a particular precinct. So I think that consolidation, you should sell on value, not only on price. I made a point at Stanford's event the other day that what ISPs are putting on line rentals now are less than what they put on a telecom line when there was a margin squeeze complaint against telecom. And both FNOs have gone in as cheap as possible, but ISPs are also competing on nothing else but price and not adding value. And that has two impacts. The first impact is that when the FNO has to pass cost increase through, whether we believe it's justified or not, the point is that the percentage of that cost increase basically is so big relative to the cost that the end user is paying the ISP that that whole cost is passed through just like that. There's no scope to absorb it in anything. And it also, as a percentage of the price, becomes quite a big percentage. So if it's an 8% increase coming from the FNO, it's an 80% increase right through to the end user. And that is a downward trend that it's going to I think it's already hit rock bottom, and I think it's going to crash. And those ISPs that cannot add value on top of the fiber's line, it's probably going to end up losing the race and losing out to the ISPs that can add value-added services to their bouquet of offering to the customer.
Hi, I'm Andrew from Afrihost. Are we expecting any FNOs to go under? Yes. And not necessarily be consolidated into things, but their networks simply being discarded and the coverage being reduced. You know, is the future just consolidation, or is there actually places where coverage is going to diminish?
Mike should probably pick this up. I don't want to speak for you, but that sounds extremely unlikely to me. If an FNO, and I'm now speaking not as a consumer representative, but as someone who's dealt with far too many liquidations in pyramid schemes in the past 2 years, watching the liquidation industry do its thing, the more likely outcome is that the asset goes on sale. And somebody picks up a fiber network for a song, and that might be a great thing because it cuts the cost, right, for the guy who takes over that network. But it's far more complicated than that. So I don't want to speak too much for the guys to the right of me because there's banks involved, there's loans that have to be repaid, so it might not be as simple as paying $1 for a nice, 2,000 kilometer fiber network and getting to sweat it. So, but the bottom line is that no, the fiber, I doubt that it'll be left in the ground to rot. Somebody will pick it up. You guys are welcome to take it from there. I have other comments, so I just want to put myself in the queue over there because I've got something to add and a question to ask.
Could I just chime in on that question quickly? I think that overall I agree with you that fiber networks that exist where the businesses have fallen apart will probably get recycled and we go to a different operator, get rebuilt, reinvigorated. I think the corner case, which is maybe not as much of a corner case as we'd like, is that there are certain areas where the criminality, the mafias, and all the rest of it are making it so difficult to operate that there are areas that will potentially be abandoned over the next few years due to the criminality and the construction mafias. Potentially not a whole operator, but certainly areas of coverage have the potential of being lost through that in the coming years, I think.
Maybe on this spot on. So we obviously, like most fiber network operators, are going in emerging markets, as we call it, and and it's true, it's very, very hard to actually not to build, but to maintain the network, keep it up, and vandalism is real, and I think this is very unfortunate to see, because this is exactly where the digital inclusion must happen, and it is not easy to maintain and to go deeper into the area. So to the previous question, I don't see any risk that any consolidation will lead to less coverage, definitely not. But this, what you are raising, it's another root cause that I think is something we need to address, and we need to educate, and we need to explain, and we need to work with the communities to improve the situation, clearly.
Yeah, so just on that, our largest fiber network sits in KZN. We have acquired network elsewhere across the country. But where we started, where we physically built, and where we extended into were rural areas of KZN, which, quite frankly, when you mention the construction mafia, this is what we deal with daily. It's gotten to the point where they've arrived at our offices with AK-47s, put staff in boardrooms, held them hostage, so they can see our books to see where we're rolling out and why we're not actually using them. Use your own staff. You have to outsource to their staff. And this is, quite frankly, this is run all by the taxi industries. The taxis have security companies that work for them. We have to hire those security companies to keep our staff or their staff safe. It just gets so convoluted and incredible because there's no fixed lines as to who owns which area, because during one fight during a weekend, somebody will have gained access to another area. So now you're working in an area that you thought was part of one consortium, or they call them, the word's gone out, forums. All the forums, thank you. And so these forums control an area. And if we're going to run a cable now 5 kilometers that goes through 3 different forum areas, we have to consult, we have to utilize staff, so we have to hand off staff to the next forum area and then the next forum area. And be very warned if you get it wrong. Your staff will have a gun to their head, your staff's vehicle will be stolen, and your staff's equipment will disappear. It is guaranteed. So these are costs now, because we have to have physical, as I mentioned, armed security with these gentlemen that we have to pay, private security. Police do absolutely nothing. The police are completely ineffectual. It's not even worth reporting or trying to even deal with it from a police perspective. It's gotten to that point. So we have to have staff who are employed who are elders in the communities to be able to stave off certain situations or make sure that this is all running and free and flowing. So when a Vodacom tower goes down or an MTN tower goes down that we're servicing, there's a whole procedure in the area where you have to phone certain people to allow you in to go and fix it. And if the guy takes the phone call at 3 in the morning and goes back to sleep and doesn't tell the community that so-and-so is coming in to fix the fiber, it could be a situation where somebody is badly injured.
Market must have become a pop star. It's a concept where a supplier uses the marketing or the market power or the position of dominance to basically eat into the margin of their customer. Now, in this world, this is what's happening to ISPs. I think Alan or somebody tried to make the point that when you increase fiber prices, the ISPs need to go along with that. We have no choice. But you do not necessarily take into account that other costs for us increase potentially at a different proportion to what your cost had increased. And the reason I'm asking this is that in the end, are we heading for a situation where ISPs are actually irrelevant to the FNOs? Are we going to have a market that's, to get to Mike's point, vertically integrated and ISPs are considered to be irrelevant?
I definitely don't think so. It's definitely not our intention. We're still very much a champion of open access. So for us, ISPs, you play a very important role in terms of being that first line of engagement with the end consumer. I think we're very respectful of your role as there's like 2 degrees of separation between us and the end consumer actually. And that helps us a lot as well as in containing operational cost in terms of having to invest in lots of frontline support staff. I think there's a role that you play there. Also, I think the comment earlier around the value-added services, that's something that I think we depend on the ISP layer to play that retail shop front basically to the consumer. Our operation is a capital intensive operation. Capital is not cheap these days. It's not easy to come by. So our focus is on building networks, going for where we're going to get a good return with the tight capital that is available to us. So to me, definitely not the case that we are in any case or in any way in favor of any kind of vertical integration. I think you will note that from what's going on in the market currently, we're actually fighting that as well.
It's also, I negotiate contracts between FNOs and ISPs every day. And I've come to realize through this negotiation that there's a complete lack of understanding of the regulatory structure, which says that there's a network service provider and that you have a separate license for a network service license. And then there's an electronic communication service or the ISP layer. And that these are not integrated layers, these are separate, 2 different layers of a value chain, each with a specific aspect that problem that you have is going to continue. And that's why I say, and it's wrong to say that the FNOs will disregard the ISPs. They're disregarding the ISPs because the ISPs in a lot of instances are simply saying, I'll plug in at your I'll plug in at your peering point or where we interconnect, and then you do everything for me. And that's not, that's not how it should be. The ISP should be, you're a provider of a network link, and I'm going to provide a service to my customer on top of that, and I'm going to provide a range of services on top of that. I think, unfortunately, because FNOs were really hard-pressed to get as much coverage on their networks as possible, as much take-up, they created what I call just add water models. So they created things like AEX, and they created things where it was really easy to start an ISP. You just had to sign a contract, plug in at a switch at Terraco, and there I've got an ISP. I'm on your portal, and the portal does my marketing for me. And that, unfortunately, has a long-term effect, and that long-term effect is this identity crisis. That's what we're seeing.
From our side, we don't go above the layer 2, so we absolutely need the ISPs. We rely on you to sell our services, and so absolutely we need you guys.
Maybe let me also comment, because Metro Fiber has direct customers, as the room knows. Nevertheless, what you are saying is absolutely crucial. We need the ISPs, and I think the 2 layers that got explained are very, very clearly defined, and we stick to those layers as well. And we see the ISPs as our main go-to market, clearly. And if we would achieve the uptake that we require to make our investment cases work, we would not go directly to market. But it is also reality that the first 20 to 30% of penetration is relatively easy to get, and everyone sells in fresh areas. Every ISP goes to the fresh area because it's easy to get customers. When you have the 30%, but for your business case, for your payback, for your ability to invest fresh money in fresh areas, you need in your built areas an uptake of 40 to 50%, and no ISP goes there because it's hard work, then that's what we are doing. And I mean, of course, Frogfoot is very clear, but there is a big brother somewhere. Octo is also very clear. There's another brother or sister. So let's be honest, I don't think that what we are doing is so unnatural, but it's also very, very clear we need the ISPs, for sure.
Just don't forget that we're also dealing with mobile operators with very significant FTTH footprints that do have a direct-to-consumer model that don't really follow this. And if they weren't so damn bad at actually selling, they would be eating our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We're very fortunate that they're so useless at actually selling proper ISP services, because otherwise I think this industry would be in serious trouble.
Thank you. And?
Thanks. Ant Brooks from ISPA. I have a question for the panelists. What one thing would you like to see government, by government I mean policymakers, regulators, what would you like to see government do, or perhaps stop doing, that would make it easier for you to roll out new fibre services to South Africans?
I think the biggest operational stumbling block for us is local government in terms of getting permission to actually roll out. That delays the whole process. To me, that's the critical thing they can get right to get some efficiencies in that process. Yeah, that will speed up our rollouts across the country.
In very short, way leaves and security is probably the two main points.
So just if I can just interrupt. There is a national standard bylaw. It was commissioned by the offices of the presidency through Operation Will and Leila. And that's, we've been involved quite fortunately that we've been able to be involved there, and we've been working with a few municipalities. I think we also just got, was it, Tom just helped me, was it Mossel Bay? Just leveraged off of that standard model bylaw to publish a new bylaw. So there's traction there. There's a rapid deployment policy. There's a national standard bylaw. So there's lots of initiatives from national government to assist local government. The extent to which there's traction will obviously depend on a local body, but at least there's been some initiative from government in that regard.
Yeah, Anton, I know that you guys were involved, and I think it's a lovely idea, but let me maybe share a comment somebody shared with me from a presentation that the Indian regulator gave at the NWC in Barcelona. And the comment is that India managed to get down their way leave process from, let me get it here, sorry, I'm just looking for it, but they managed to get their way leave process down to a matter of weeks from 18 plus months. They actually took, in terms of the Indian 5G rollout, and yes, it was a mobile rollout, but the same applies. They actually took things seriously. You know, how long has this model bylaw been in place? Where is it imposed? Where have we actually seen anything change? You know, it's nice, but respectfully, it's not even 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. It's like a stumble forwards, and then you land up with things like the construction mafias and the power issues and the water issues, then actually pushing you 5 meters backwards. So nice to have, but no actual real indication of a government that's actually serious about getting infrastructure deployed. The other thing is real action in terms of direct infrastructure access. Now, I'm not a big fan of over-regulation, but at the same time, the fact that our industry is having to overbuild is sometimes greed, sometimes stupid business models, and sometimes because they can't get access to appropriate shared infrastructure at appropriate levels. And again, the authority has been taking great pot shots at the mobile operators as if they are the devil incarnate, but ignoring that ultimately the opening infrastructure is the key element. And so there's little incentive. I haven't seen, again, I don't work that much in South Africa, but I haven't seen a real fix in terms of ICASA's processes around facilities sharing. I really think that if they want to be serious, this actually needs more than just more talk and models. It actually needs something to be shoved down the throats of local, provincial, and national government, and it needs operators working together rather than paying lip service to building infrastructure. I don't know if anybody's going to the infrastructure summit next week. Should be fun. I expect yet another talk shop.
It's Willem from Backspace. I just want to pose a question to you guys. Why do you guys normally, when you do these free bandwidth upgrades, go very social with it, but when you do price increases, you expect the ISP to share that bad news to the customers?
Thank you.
Hi, Joe. So it's about 10 years, I think, since the FTTH revolution sort of started. The question is about looking forward. So when are we going to see 10 gig services? The general sentiment I pick up is that you guys are pretty negative about your business models. So I'm wondering, are we at the end of the road of the price increases? Do you think it's sustainable now? And how soon can we start making some progress, making things better?
I mean, I can't speak commercially because I'm not commercially involved, but I can speak to trends I've been seeing over the years. And I mean, William made a point around the 20,000 Rand a month where you were buying from Telkom, because we come from a point where there was a monopoly that could charge what it wanted to. And we all know in the history, CCOM came and it was hailed as the next sort of like breakthrough to cost reductions, and we saw cost reductions coming down and down and down and down. It can't go on forever. Every business costs money to support. It must, at some point, reach a rock bottom, and from there it will start going up inflationary. My panelists can tell us whether they think we're there or not. But we can't, we were used to a deflationary environment for a long time because we were in a demonopolized, liberalized environment. But that was never going to be a forever trend.
We are very bullish, honestly, about the future, and we are very positive about the business model that we have. I think the discussion started was questions around pricing, right? And that it's very bad that we increase prices as FNOs. I believe we are bullish about it because there are huge opportunities still. I mean, we saw it yesterday, the comparison between internet access via mobile versus fixed. And I think there's still room to increase the fixed side significantly. I believe there are a lot of areas that are untapped still. We believe in FTTB as well from a fiber point of view. So we are actually quite bullish about the future. I think it's just, we should just not be so focused on one topic, which is pricing going down instead of pricing in a reasonable way going up over time, like any other industry. It's not different from any other utility, from any other insurance, from any other entertainment. I mean, why not? And I believe if we can turn this mental thing around from telco prices have to go down to reasonably go up, I believe the future is very bright and investment cases can work. Reality is this year is I think we all realize this, that the build program slowed down, and why is that? It is because I believe the paybacks are not as they should have been or were anticipated, and to be also honest, for us at least, interest rates are weighing quite heavily on us and on the capital that we have deployed. So this combination of the realization that maybe uptake is not as big as we thought or fast as we thought, and interest rates is currently cooling down the industry, I believe. But we are very clear, consolidation must happen. We want to be part of that, and we want to continue to invest. So it's not negative at all on our side.
Sorry, I found the slide that I was looking for to respond to Ant, but I think it touches here as well. So these are some of the interventions. Okay, this is on towers, but and clearance easing and wireless permissions for towers, 90 days to instant. Simple application and time-bound permission for usage of street furniture. So if you want to hang fiber on street poles, making use of existing street furniture, a portal to streamline right-of-way permissions, and the key, right-of-way permissions reduced from 52 weeks to 2 weeks. Now, if you could change that in South Africa, and you could change the security issues that have been spoken about, you could significantly reduce the costs that F&Os have to incur to actually deploy and maintain their networks. And that could really give a kickstart to help slow down price increases. I'm inclined to agree. You can't expect pricing in an infrastructure business where you've got to pay O&M going forward. You can't expect pricing to go down in this space, but you can certainly slow the increase that we're seeing. My perception is that the increases are slowing down. Things are normalizing. But one of the key elements has got to be, how do you reduce costs? And some of those are these additional incremental costs that are imposed on top of F&Os that were also not really baked into business cases at the beginning.
Can I go first? I'm going to take a different slant here. So I think we're already starting to run out of runway in terms of how much you can push the speed with the current pricing structures. Because fiber is an ultimate technology, it's unlimited to some extent. The current inflection point is around 1 gig, right? Looking at it idealistically, where we would want to get is that most consumers actually have access to higher speeds and actually have that unlimited capability that's reliable and faster than what you currently can get. It's a bit of a crystal ball question, really. At what point will the train tracks that we've laid be deployed for high-speed services from other technologies? I think we're ready for that. But in terms of pushing the price, I think we have, you can see it, we've eroded the entry level. It's flat at the 500 Rand point. And if you look at the difference between the speeds from there up to 1 gig now, it's not a big difference.
I want to reiterate a question, actually, that Joe asked, which is, what do you guys think about 10 gig? And when will we see that? And then one of those things that Cory Doctorow calls a ramble and then a what about that? I'm going to just wanted to point this out. Access, love you, Franco, launched a Vodacom resale package recently. We wrote about it this morning. And to Alan's earlier point about Vodacom being the most expensive and bad and all that, that's 299 Rand, uncapped, 50 gig FUP. When you hit the FUP, you go down to 2 meg. And up to 20 meg service, right? So it's slower than the entry-level suburban fiber networks. The high-density fiber networks have a 20 meg service, but not in the leafy suburbs. But it's an interesting one where we're seeing, I don't know if this is a cyclical thing, where we're seeing the mobile operators come in at much lower price because they've got all this fancy new spectrum. But we've also seen this movie before, where they launch uncapped stuff, and the network saturates and it falls over. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. This is just another one of those pricing pressures on the ISPs that are not offering services like this, and an incentive for them to start offering stuff like this and not sell fiber, because there might be higher uptake on products like these. So what do you think about that?
Well, as a consumer, not a technologist, 10 gig sounds amazing. Who can use it? Yeah, love you, Joe. Even my service. Until I cabled my house, it was barely usable. So it doesn't matter what you put in, seeing as most people are going to be using Wi-Fi. You're subject to the capabilities of whatever hardware you put into the house. So how many people are lunatics like me and are actually willing to spend the extra money to actually go and get somebody to run cable through to APs around their house so that they actually get a seamless experience? I would suspect not that many, which means that you can offer 10 gig, but it ultimately is just a marketing gimmick. And very few consumers will use it, which is great, because then you can oversell the shit out of that network on the basis that it's a 10 gig it's a 10 gig network, and some idiot who needs to buy the fastest and the best will buy it, but actually they're not going to use it. Very few people will actually land up using even a gig service. Is unlikely to be used, but that's fantastic, because then you can just contend your network to your heart's content and charge a premium for it.
Can I maybe ask a question on the uncapped offer? Is this a service that goes down from whatever megs to 1 or 2 megs after a certain period? Do we really want to call this uncapped? I thought this time is over. Uncapped unlimited is uncapped unlimited. It's not capping. I mean, you drive with an Uber, and after 5 kilometers, it slows down to 1 kilometer per hour, and then, no, but it's not capped. I'm still rolling. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, so I think, and maybe you want to pick up on this, but you know, the issue is in terms of how you market things, is a debate which our regulator has not actually stood up to and has not taken on. So it's been left to what used to be the Advertising Standards Authority. I forget their new name, but yeah, that sounds extremely odd. So they have some views in terms of how you can market things. They engaged ISPA. They got some advice from ISPA in terms of uncapped, unlimited, how that can go through. We all understand that there is a need for some sort of fair usage policy, and you know, unless somebody actually takes this on, or a regulator is willing to take it on other than the advertising regulator, then consumers will buy into that bullshit. Well, you keep raising this question about, do we want to do this to our consumers? We need to inform them of the benefits of fiber, how to take that forward. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, you know, there used to be an association called the FTTH Council, which then changed its name to the FTTX Council. And that's now morphed into the Digital Council Africa, and is now doing far more important things than actually worrying about fiber. So the key question is, who's going to be telling consumers this? Because if you're asking us as ISPs to actually dip into our pockets to pay for marketing, we're going to tell you to screw off because our margins are paper thin. So who's going to actually go to the consumers and preach the fiber benefit, because the FTTH Council no longer exists, and they're now far more interested in much weightier issues. So who actually preaches the fiber message? Who's going to tell people about the benefits of a high fiber diet?
And to just throw this out there, it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek jab, but it had to be done, to what you're up against in terms of marketing there. MTN put out an ad during the Rugby World Cup, I don't know how many of you saw it, where they were essentially inferring that fiber goes down and 5G stays up. It was very funny, but that's how you sink a message into people's brains. You make it funny, you make them laugh at it. It's like, oh yeah, fiber's unreliable and 5G is better. Like that absolutely has to be countered with also get Siya Kolisi in and do an ad to say the exact opposite, because we know it's not true. Yeah, this is the kind of marketing stuff that's out there and that the fiber industry is up against. By the way, the reason I said it was a tongue-in-cheek jab is because I asked MTN about what Supersonic thinks about their ad.
Did you get an answer? You're still waiting.
I got an answer. I got an answer. It was very much, we were just having some fun. You know, it's just a bit of fun marketing. We were having a good time. Blah blah blah.
Not to mention that those 5G towers are backhauled by fiber. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Thank you, attendees, for the questions. It's now time for a tea break, so we'll meet back here at 10:30. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back everybody. We're now going to have a session on the fiber best practices. You all know Ant. If you don't know Ant, please come and speak to me. I want a word. And he will start us off now with an overview of our fiber best practices.
A workshop on combating misinformation, but the organizers gave everyone the wrong address. Can we get the slides? So I'm hoping that most of you already read the best practices document, and I'm going to try and stick to a quick, high-level view of what they say, which means that I'm going to try and talk fast, because I'd like to leave as much time as possible to workshop some of the rough edges and things you might not have gotten right. Okay. Whilst we're waiting for slides, a little bit of background to the best practice document. It is a project of ISPA's Operators Working Group. The Operators Working Group is the bit of ISPA that figures out how ISPA engages with FNOs, MNOs, and any other NOs that pop up. It is about a 30-page document. It's not a pleasant read because it's a best practices document, but it's not a hard read. You can probably get through it in 10 minutes. The version that we're looking at the moment is version 3.1 that we published in December last year, and it is not currently on the public section of the ISPA website because we view it as a draft document, but if any of you don't have a copy and would like one, please ask the Secretariat. We will happily send it to you to read. The goal of this best practice document is to ensure that fiber users get a consistent, fair, and reasonable experience when they're getting services. So everything we have in that document is targeted at making sure the users get a good experience. The best practices do not exist in a vacuum. There is a lot of competition law, there's the Electronic Communications Act and POPIA that all inform what we have in there. We tried quite hard to get a lot of input from ISPs and FNOs. We sent it to a lot of FNOs, we visited some of them, and we got a lot of input from ISPA's members and from some ISPs that aren't ISPA members. And we're hoping that we get comments from this workshop that we will fold into the next version of the document. The document is fairly simple, has contents and introduction at the beginning, it has some acknowledgement and a version history at the end, and the meat is 4 bits in the middle. The first section, we talk about what we think open access networks are. Second part is communications with customers and whose responsibility that is. The bigger section is communication between FNOs and ISPs, and then we've got a couple of technical recommendations in the miscellaneous chunk. Going to have a quick look at each of those. First of all, section on open access networks. It turns out that there is not a good definition of open access networks. There is not a definition of open access networks in any telecommunication standards, and there is not a definition of an open access network in South African law at all. The best definition we could find was on Wikipedia, which is not a good place to get your definitions, because in the time since we used Wikipedia for our definition in this document, somebody has edited the Wikipedia page so it no longer says the same thing that we assumed it would when we prepared the document. In any case, what we assume to be minimum requirements if you want to call your network an open access network is universal transparent pricing. Both of those words are important. We think it should be transparent. You should not hide your prices behind an NDA. You should be willing to say what your prices are for your open access network to anybody who is interested in using that network. And the pricing should be universal. That means everybody using your network should pay the same price for the same service. Very importantly, if you're running an open access network, you should not be competing directly with the ISPs using the open access network. If you're running an open access network, it is quite important not to employ any discriminatory tactics. That's not just limited to pricing. When you roll out your network to a new area, if you give someone exclusivity in providing services for the first 3 months that you're providing services in that new area, you're not running an open access network, you're running a limited access network because it's not open to everybody when you roll out. Try and avoid doing that. Minimal barriers to entry. You should not, if you're running an open access network, go, I don't want to have more than 10 ISPs. Again, that's a limited access network. If you want to be open, you should have as many ISPs as want to come on board. We understand that you may have some costs for each ISP you add. You have administrative costs to onboard them. You have some technical costs because you have to provide some means to connect to them. Ideally, whatever your minimum commitments are should be limited to the cost to you to bring a new ISP on board. And you should also recognize that sometimes an ISP will want access to your network for strategic reasons to access a few customers because they're trying to service a corporate who has some people in different areas, and some of them are on your network, so they need to have access to fulfill that contract. Communications with customers. The licensing here is really clear in South Africa. We have electronic communications network service providers that are fiber network operators in this case, and we have the electronic communication service providers. Those are the ISPs. It is the ISPs that have customers. The FNOs have customers too, but those customers are the ISPs, not the end users. When it comes to personal information, we have some things in the recommendations document that are at odds with the current practice of quite a few FNOs. We do not believe that the FNO should be hanging on to customer data indefinitely because they are the ISP's customers. The ISP collects the information from that customer, where they live, their contact details. They give it to the FNO to do the installation. That is the purpose that they have that information. When the installation is done, the FNO should be deleting that customer's personal information because it doesn't need it anymore, and it is up to the ISP to look after that data. FNOs will argue, no, we need to have the customer's contact details in case we need to support them. No, if there is a need for you to support that customer, the ISP should be giving you those details again. That way, if they're changed, you're not using incorrect information, you're getting the current accurate information from the ISP. Linked to that, we believe it's the responsibility of the ISP to communicate and support the customer, not the responsibility of the FNO. This is something ISPs need to take to heart too. We frequently hear from FNOs that they have ISPs on their network who assume that the FNO will do some of the customer support and therefore invest less into providing the support. That's not how it should work. Service level agreements, if you have different service level agreements for different products, please make that clear to customers. That's for ISPs and FNOs. Then section C is the biggest section. It covers all kinds of communications between FNOs and ISPs. Most of this is common sense. FNOs should be transparent about network outages and provide accessible and accurate information to ISPs. Ideally, you should provide an automated platform for ISPs to check what the status of an individual line is, because if you can automate that, you don't have to have as many staff handling all the annoyed calls from ISPs to try and get information. It's worth investing in a solid API to interact with your ISPs, and as one of the panelists said earlier, that is an area where most FNOs have not invested enough. Please have a clear fault reporting process and an escalation path. Your fault reporting process will break quite a lot of the time, and ISPs need to have someone to tell that they're not getting feedback. And it's just common sense to communicate installation times and any limitations on your installation estimates clearly. Notice of price increases. We're going to have a look at that again at the end. Most FNOs give 30 days notice of price increases, and some of them give that notice after 5 p.m. on the 31st of the month, which is technically fine if you say you have to give 30 days contract, but it's a really mean-spirited way to do it. Please don't do that. You do not need to wait until 5 p.m. on the very last day you can give notice. The ISPs cannot give their customers 30 days notice of price increase if you leave it to the last minute. We recommend in the best practice recommendation 70 days. We would prefer it to be 90, but we've settled on 70. That is because ISPs sign up customers with different start dates during the month. So in order to be able to give all your customers 30 days notice of a change, you need at least 60 days, and we've added 10 days because you have to do some work inside the company to figure out prices have gone up, what am I going to charge, here's how I'm going to communicate that message, here's what my admin department needs to do, and we're saying that 10 days is pretty tight, but we're hoping that ISPs can do it in 10 days. Please, if you're an F&O, try and aim to give at least 70 days notice to your ISPs of price changes. Service upgrades. Please consider how you're doing this really carefully. Free upgrades are not free. When you go to market on the socials, as was mentioned earlier, and say, these are free upgrades, you are lying. They are not free upgrades. What you mean is, these are upgrades that we are not going to charge ISPs more for. That doesn't make them free. Doesn't make it free for the ISP, who may have to upgrade the port speeds at the NNI. Doesn't make it free for the ISP, who has to have more capacity to carry the traffic from customers who've been upgraded. And it may not even be free for the customer, even if the ISP absorbs those costs, because some customers will have to upgrade the equipment they have to deal with the higher speeds. So it's very misleading when you're marketing something as free when it's not. Okay, the best practice recommendations view a change of customer as potentially two different things. An installation fee should be charged if somebody has to go to the customer's premises, put new equipment in, or change some of the configuration of the equipment that's already there. It's not an installation if nobody has to go out to the customer. At most, it's then an activation fee because you've got some administrative cost. And an activation should be a lot cheaper if you charge for it at all. Hopefully, we're going to have some debate about migrations and dispute resolutions at the end, so I'll deal with that then. And some more flexibility with cancellation notice periods would be nice too, for reasons that we'll also look at a little bit later. Hey, miscellaneous issues. So FNOs should please support 1500 byte MTU sizes, most do, so that's good. And then Stanford's welcome to come up here and kick me now, because in the document at the moment we suggest that accurate and up-to-date network map data should please be made available in .kml format. I'm guessing we should update that to say KML is best practice at the moment, but it's not best practice in the long term. Right, so now we're on to some issues that I hope will stimulate debate, and we would really like for people to start giving us input. I'm going to go through these things, then I'm going to hand over to Gideon to try and get some discussion going. We want feedback on these best practice recommendations. We don't know whether we've got everything right, and we would like to improve them with your input. Let's look at notice of price changes. We covered this earlier. Our recommendations are 70 days. 30 days is not enough. ISPs need more warning. And if you're not going to be able to give them 70 days notice, then please don't penalize the ISPs when some of their customers cancel. Because that's a double-barrel thing. You're not giving the ISP enough chance to inform its customers, and when they cancel, you penalize them. And changes must please be communicated properly. A price increase is not something you should stick as an afterthought into your weekly newsletter that none of your ISPs are reading. And we see this. It goes into this newsletter that's being filtered off, no one ever reads. And a really common complaint we get from ISPs is they learn about F&O price increases by reading coverage on my broadband, not because they've been getting a notice from the F&O. It's a big problem. Make sure you're communicating that clearly. It's fine to put in big letters, prices are going up in the subject line. You don't need to hide it. You need to make sure your ISP knows about it. Cancellation and migrations, a real pain point in the industry. FNOs have arbitrary cancellation date requirements. Now you must tell us by the 28th of the month that you're cancelling the line, or you'll be charged for the next month. But ISPs really need more support from FNOs in dealing with non-paying customers. A debit order might fail on the 2nd, goes through again, it fails on the 7th. It's going to be the 10th before the ISP knows it's failed. They're not getting money from that customer. It's now the 10th of the month. So they're on the hook, not just for that month, but for the next month too, for that customer's service. They're never going to get the money back, and yet they're paying the FNO for 2 months of service. That's all of the margin gone for that customer for the duration of that service. It'd be good to have some ideas from FNOs and how they can assist in terms of how they deal with these cancellation dates to provide better support for ISPs. Some ideas we've kicked around. It'd be great if FNOs could do pro rata billing for months. If you cancel the line on the 10th, then you should be charged up to the 10th. I know that the FNOs have not built billing systems that do this well, but when you're upgrading them, because you do need to keep upgrading your systems, consider being able to do this to give it a little bit more flexibility for what you're charging the ISPs. Worth noting, ISPs can afford to be a bit more aggressive in what they try and get back from their customers. So we know from the National Consumer Tribunal, having fined Vodacom millions of rands, that you can't charge 70% of the value of a contract when someone tries to cancel it. But you are entitled to recuperate installation costs, you're entitled to claw back any equipment costs, and you can charge a reasonable cancellation fee. That means if you know that you're going to be on the hook for 2 extra months of charges from the FNO, you can charge your customer an extra 2 months of service fees if they cancel. You're entitled to do that. You're not going to run foul of the Consumer Protection Act if you do. Just also notice in passing, the CPA actually says 20 business days is the notice your customer can give you. If you're saying 30 calendar days, you're not quite compliant with what the CPA actually says. Your customer could give you 20 business days and you say, oh, it wasn't a calendar day's notice. No, they can give you 20 business days notice. It would be good to see support, in some cases, coming back for line suspensions, for an ISP to be able to say this line is suspended, and for nobody to be getting any money from that line. So the FNO is not picking up money from the ISP is not charging the customer. That would really help with the managing non-paying customers. Migrations, a little bit more about migrations. Why do lines move from one ISP to another? Well, first, a customer might just be fed up with an ISP and want to change, obvious reason. You also get a lot of customers just trying to get out of paying by going to another ISP, of running up a bill, let's move to another ISP and I'll pay them for a while and then I'll stop paying them too. Or there might be a free trial abuser. You see customers going for a 3 months trial and I've already put an order with another ISP before my free trial has run out. And the third one there, the customer using the line has changed. That's when you have a landlord, has tenants, the landlord makes it the tenant's problem to get the service. Person moves out, they don't cancel the line, new tenant comes in, the customer has changed. There's real difficulties in migrating that line because the previous customer's still on contract, hasn't cancelled properly, the ISP doesn't want to release the line, but the new person wanting to use it has nothing whatsoever to do with the old customer. Those are the 3 most common reasons, but we also see increasingly customers wanting to get service from 2 ISPs, so if one's down, they can still get service from the other. Technically, if FNOs can support that, we encourage it. And the last one, the line has moved not because anybody wanted it to, but because someone messed up the address. The line was ordered for 208A, and the poor guy who is in 208 has his line migrated because instead of assigning a new line to an ISP, 208's line has been moved from the ISP they were quite happy with to a new ISP. That's a line that is migrated even though it shouldn't have. It's really important as an FNO and an ISP that you have good processes and staff to support migration processes. It's vital that the ISP that is losing that line must be kept informed at all times, actively. It's not good enough for an ISP to have to go onto your system to know they're losing a line. You need to tell them. The ISP as an FNO is your customer. They are paying you. You should not summarily disconnect a service you're being paid for because someone else tells you that they want to start taking that service. You're still getting money from that ISP. Double dipping, this is interesting. So you require cancellation notice before the 28th of the month. The ISP tells you on the 10th they're cancelling the service. Another ISP is already providing service by the 1st of the next month. You're still charging the first ISP money for that line for that month, and you're picking up money from the second ISP. There are a surprising number of FNOs whose systems allow them to bill 2 ISPs for the same line in the same month. Right? If you're an FNO, then your system lets you do that. Please realize that there are jurisdictions in which that will be a crime to be charging 2 different customers for the same service in the same month. If your systems let you do that, please make them stop doing that. You should not be double dipping on the service. We have a slightly controversial recommendation. It'd be good to get some feedback on that. We think it's a problem to share information about bad paying customers. It's personal information. As tempting as it is to want to broadcast your list of customers that don't pay you to everyone in the world, you should not do that. You will get into trouble. But there's nothing stopping an FNO from saying this line has moved 5 times in the last year. Right? This is a line with a high migration number on it. That's not customer information. It's not related to any one particular customer. It is just a count of that line. So we're recommending FNOs do that. it's useful because it may be indicative of a problematic customer, but it's also likely to be indicative of a situation where you've got a landlord with a tenant that changes frequently, and if you see a high count, you want to take extra care that you're getting the right information from the customer to know that it is a customer, that is a tenant, and you can manage that a little bit better. When there are line migrations, there will always be disputes. ISP1, ISP2 both believe they have a right to provide a service to a customer. You need to have, as an ISP and an F&O, some internal process for managing these disputes. You need to make sure that both the ISPs involved understand there is now a dispute, because they may need to resolve it ultimately without have to resolve it with each other via the F&O. Requiring reasonable proof of who actually is the customer at that premises is a good idea. And right now in the recommendations, we're saying that if you've got two ISPs both giving you evidence that they are providing service to that customer, you should err on the side of whoever currently has the line and not disconnect it. That is because that ISP is currently your customer. They are paying you money, so you should not summarily disconnect their service without a good reason. If anyone thinks this is a bad approach, please tell us, but this is what we have at the moment. And again, you need to make sure you have staff to support this. It's not great if you have a dispute process and nobody ever deals with those disputes, or it takes a week to deal with it, especially if your staff got confused between 208 and 208A, you moved the line, now there's a dispute, you need to have staff capable of resolving that. Right. Over to the audience. I'm going to sit down and start taking furious notes and hand over to Gideon. A few questions. Please come up to the mic, give us your input. What's a reasonable approach to cancellation periods? What should FNOs be requiring from ISPs? What could FNOs not cope with in terms of cancellation periods? What's the ideal way to handle line migrations from one ISP to another? How should FNOs resolve disputes between ISPs, and should they even be playing a role there? And then what do we all agree is a reasonable notice for price increases? It's not 30 days. We think it's 70. Maybe there's grounds for it to be longer than that. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, first question, Willem. You're at the mic. Or Saul? No. Oh, sorry.
Hello. Hi, Saul from eNetworks. I think to Anne's point, it's imperative to understand who the customer is from the FNO's perspective. The ISP is the customer, not the end user. And so from the FNO's perspective, from an activation, from an end user, from a migration, the end user's name is irrelevant to the FNO. So if Frank is staying at number 108, Bob moves in, the ISP is ISPA, and they get the new tenant. It's actually irrelevant to the FNO to change things, because the line is staying in the ISP's name, so therefore there's no migration, there's no reactivation. The line is staying in that person's name. That's called knowing your customer's the ISP. Whoever's using that service is actually irrelevant to the FNO. So activations, migrations, if it's staying with the ISP, that's what's important. And I agree wholeheartedly, activation, price increases, all those kind of things. There's no such thing as a free price increase. I think it was discussed quite heavily this morning. Lines need to, their costs, you might be offering a free upgrade from the line speed, but there are all the other services that go on top of that go to the cost pricing of the service.
Saul, sorry, before you disappear, I just want, there were two questions really. With regards to the line migration, you're specifically talking about a migration within the context of one ISP or across ISPs?
So same ISP. So it's currently deemed and you have to reactivate because there's a requirement from many FNOs that you have to you have to re-register that line. If the lines, it's the same as if I can use sort of, if you have a link from Liquid or DFA to customer, they don't care who the customer is. It's at that premises. If you get the new tenant, the line's in your name. You're the customer of DFA, of the telecom, of OpenServe, whoever it is. It's the same story here. That line is in 108 Pitt Street. You know the tenant's leaving, or the house has been sold. You've been proactive, got the new landowner, new tenant's name. That's staying in your name. You're keeping the line. You've got the new customer. Sorry? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, but what I'm missing, I'm probably missing the intent of your question. How will the FNO know?
It's irrelevant.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes.
The FNO doesn't need to know that the end user's changed because they're still billing the ISP. The ISP is still paying. So if the person in the house has changed, it's irrelevant to the FNO.
So is that a requirement from some of the FNOs to have that information,
Yes.
despite it being irrelevant?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a charge for it. No, the recommendation is no. The FNO doesn't keep the details, but there's also a requirement that if the resident changes, you have to re-register and pay a fee.
Okay, I'm not sure if is there a change to the recommendations we need to take into account here? No. Okay. So with regards to your second question, was it, or the second part of your statement, is just a statement, or is there something you feel we need to amend? Okay. Thank you.
Jan Vermeulen and my broadband. I have a different agenda than the ISPs in the room, obviously. But were there recommendations on how much to charge for cancellations, for downgrades, for activations? That's it. Thanks.
No, because ISPA is very respectful of the competition law, and it would be illegal for us to be discussing prices for services in an industry association.
Regardless of specific RAND amount, that whether there should or should not be charges?
The recommendations do have something to say about what charges are appropriate, yes.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
A very well done to the ISPA Fiber Working Group and the Operators Group for coming up with this document. I'd like to address, what does the document mean? I have an example, but it's maybe not a very good one, but there's this piece called A Woman of Valor, and it depends on which religion you come from, how you view this thing about a woman of valor. I know as Jewish people, we think that's only achievable by God, and many Christian women think that they can actually be a woman of valor. So are we as ISPA expecting FNOs to actually achieve best practice, or is it just like a document that they really should aim to achieve sometime in the future when maybe they can get better and focus on just getting operations going right now. I mean, is this really enforceable in any way? It's kind of like a bit weak unless we can incorporate it into like code of conduct or something like that. I hope that we have plans to incorporate it into a code of conduct and we can hold FNOs accountable for actually making sure that they don't just see it as some target that they must reach, but some quality of service that they should actually apply as soon as possible. That's on the one side. I mean, I love the document. I would also like to talk to the ISPs in the room because I feel that we're lacking in FNOs in the room.
Alan, can I ask you to hold the second part of your question, because I actually want to comment on the first part and potentially can add something more formal to that. I think it was great to have FNOs actually join a panel in an environment where there's a lot of ISPs who sees things differently. And I think the document is a very good starting point for dialogue with FNOs. Because we're not just starting with random complaints, we're actually starting with recommendations which address things probably a bit more from an ISP perspective, but that acknowledges the FNO perspective. And I think the intent should be to have dialogue with them and get engagement, because we are, as has been repeatedly said, part of the same ecosystem. If that doesn't work, what one does after that, that's a different matter. But I do think this is a really important use of the recommendations.
So Alan, yes, we do have plans to do something with the best practice recommendations once it's done. If you read through the current document, in each section, this is the recommendations, then we've got a little box that says checklist if you're an ISP, things you should be doing and not doing, checklist if you're an FNO, things you should be doing and not doing. Our goal, when we feel that the document is stable enough to be released as not a final version, but a finished non-draft version, the intention is to go through that and start scoring the FNOs to see how well they're performing based on our best practice recommendations. So as ISPA, we have 2 parallel projects. The next slot, which unfortunately is my voice again, we're going to present the results of the February perception study. That's asking ISPs how they feel about what the FNOs do, completely subjective. That's one aspect. Once we've got the best practices settled, we're going to go through those and say, objectively, this is how we think each network is doing in terms of our best practice recommendations. Do they support something better than .kml files? Are they offering everybody transparent, universal pricing on that? So we will be rating the networks based on our recommendations and giving the networks a chance to dispute whether we think we've rated them correctly or not.
Thanks. Alan, your second question?
Thanks, yes. It will gain traction and power over time. That's what we're saying. In the meantime, it's just something to look at. Yeah, I wanted to talk to the other ISPs and see if there's a way that we can work a bit closer together. Like, I know some of the big FNOs have kind of personal relationships with some of the big ISPs. It's quite clearly there's a little bit of background stuff happening that us smaller ISPs don't get to see within the big FNOs. You've got special people working there. And as bigger ISPs, I understand that you may not pay as much attention to detail as some of our smaller ones, and you might, by mistake, want to take over one of our customers' lines because you made a mistake with the address, the lease isn't very clear, and you're submitting the lease. Please, let's work together. If you're going to end up taking over our line, at least don't block us from getting it back. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that Vumatel doesn't send out an email when another ISP wants to take over one of our customers' lines. We have to log into the portal. If we do it within the 72-hour period, we can reject it. And often we want to take over somebody else's line, and then it gets rejected because they're still in the 30-day cancellation period, and the FNO is trying to double dip here. So I don't know how, but we really need to work a bit more closely together when we're blocking each other and doing things that we shouldn't be doing to harm each other. We need to work together against the FNOs, please. So if you can help us, make sure that those things go more smoothly, it will be much helpful to us. I find it really, really upsetting about the FNOs communicating with our customers. They do it without informing us, and they tell things to our customers that they should be telling us and not, telling them. Like last month we had a terrible outage in OBS, and apparently we were told. I've been told 10 times that we were told, but they can't tell us how we were told. They did tell us that the customers were told by SMS. Our customers were sent an SMS 2 days before. And they pointed out on their portal, if you log in, they did put a network notice on the portal at the time that the 2 days maintenance started. So all our customers went down for 2 days because some joint needed to be replaced. Based on that, I don't want to give the FNOs any information about our customers. I've told our staff to please put your telephone number there and you arrange the time for the installation. In fact, when you talk to the customer, get some pre-arranged times, and when the FNO calls you up to set up the installation, set one of those times and tell the customer. It's a bit more work for us, but at least then we're going to get the SMS when maintenance is happening there, and we can tell the customer. So my advice to the ISPs is stop giving your customer, if you can, if you have the capacity, don't give your customer information to the FNO. It's not part of the contract. You don't have to do it. If your customer changes, you don't need to tell them that. They only need to have your information. The only justification that they have for you to give them the customer number is so that you don't have to have the hassle to make the appointment to go and do the installation. It's going to have my mobile number and a few other staff mobile numbers, and that will be it going into the future, because we've really been burned badly by this. It's not fair. I could go on and on, but I'll let someone else have a chance.
Okay, so just, I know we did, in recommendations, we did struggle with the sharing of information, and I'm not sure what we concluded about what information FNOs should have or not have with regards to Alan's last question. I don't honestly agree with everything, but potentially we should. Okay, now it's too. I hate this mic. I'll try. So Alan, I hear you. I think a lot of people feel frustration. I'm just not sure how we can improve our means of recommendations to alleviate that. I think we have a lot there already that if it is implemented should help.
Hi, Paul Huell. I'm hoping I don't make your life even more difficult than Alan did, but I probably will, and I might be giving Jan something to write about. I'm following on, and I hope I'm understanding Saul correctly, and I think it does tie in. Be the case that the FNO's client is the ISP, not the end user, and that has ramifications. And made mention of the default position and so on. The existing ISP is the FNO's client. Therefore, that should be the default state position and so on. The concern that comes in my mind, and I'm not asking for a have you resolved this, and I don't know that you can completely resolve this, but is the most powerful tool to get adoption of these sorts of best practices by an FNO is if the FNOs are on board, because they also happen to have some form of ISP business. In other words, if they're an ISPA member or they're part of a group that's an ISPA member and so on. That introduces a whole bunch of other issues, particularly about FNOs wanting information and there being an ISP business in there. And what I'm just sort of wondering and sort of partly suggesting, but haven't thought it through completely, but is that in the process of getting a best practice position out from ISPA regarding relations between FNOs and their ISP clients, in addition to being very clear about the fact that the end user is the ISP's client, defining end user as the ISP's client, and the F&O may have, when you define communication between the F&O and end user, it's clear that the end user does not have a contractual relationship with the F&O, but is to, set up the revision process, to set up the continuation, of this mechanism on addressing the fact that F&Os and ISPs are going to have to collectively, continuously reshape and develop a deep, nurtured relationship. I mean, you're in bed together regardless, so it's best to make sure that those ground rules are developed over time, rather than just kind of going, hey, we've had these problems, we've developed these recommendations, and the only way that these recommendations are adopted happens to be the players where there's the greatest risk of later problems. I hope I'm making sense on that. Yeah, I hope I was clear enough.
It's quite a bit to absorb. So to clarify, is your concern is largely around, these recommendations are correct and useful, or is it whether we will get them accepted?
So my concern is that I think the recommendations are, as we are speaking, the most correct and most useful under present circumstances. That will not remain forever.
Okay.
For these recommendations to be meaningful, they have to be adopted and implemented, particularly by the F&Os.
Agreed.
The concern that I've got is that, and this is as somebody not currently affected by this other than as a user, is that the F&Os, which have the most incentive to actually follow what the ISPs are saying is best practice, also happen to be the F&Os who have the most incentive in tying up their ISP type business and their F&O type business. And that's the area where I see the most risk of conflict. My getting an SMS from a firm that is both an ISP and an F&O about my line going down when I'm with a different ISP kind of resonates on that. And I'm just sort of asking to what extent in the process to revise and continue building on these, review that relationship and to
We don't, but one interesting thing that happened when we started sharing the best practice recommendations with the F&Os is almost all of them said, when we read through this, we're actually following most of the recommended practices, because it's a whole laundry list of things you shouldn't do, and most F&Os are pretty well behaved when you go through the whole list. So 80% sticking to the best practice, but there's 20% of those things that they're doing that are really problematic, and they're different depending on the F&Os. So the good news is for F&Os that probably you're actually doing most of these best practices already. Same for ISPs. What we want you to do is have a look at where you're not following those best practices, and please consider tweaking what you do. In terms of revising it, this document has had about 6 to 8 revisions already. We thought we were at the final version, and we got a flurry of new input. We do intend to revise it as necessary as the market changes. It has to be a living document because this is an industry that changes quickly, and so our best practice recommendations will have to try hard to keep up.
Joe, go for it.
I'm wondering if there isn't sort of scope to make the interconnect stuff a bit more, let's say, standardized and somewhat, well, I'd like to see the word cost-based somewhere in there. There was an event where one of the F&Os announced some new port fee pricing, and then within, let's say, I don't know, within 6 months, there was this kind of copycat effect where all the other guys just said, oh, that's groovy. I'm also going to make my port fees 4 times more. Obviously, pricing is a sensitive topic in this forum, but I think it'd be nice to see some kind of logic about things being cost-based.
Noted, and I know what you refer to, and honestly, I think most of us understand that that is about not necessarily about the money, but about not wanting ISPs with 2 or 3 or 5 lines to be on the networks because, you know, from an F&O perspective, that is not sustainable, having hundreds of trivial ISPs. I don't necessarily think hiking the port fees was the right way to do that because then it comes across a money grab, but that's my opinion. I don't really feel qualified to say anything about what we can say about those things in the best practices. Do we have anything that addresses that? Specifically the NNI fees being hiked or the aggregation fees, whatever it's called. I do think it's worth discussing whether we can include that and in what form we can include that. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Anthony. I'm just from a small bit of the internet. So my question to ISPA, besides just complimenting and saying thank you very much for this and being obviously a part of the process and being involved in the discussions for this document, I think it's a great document and I think it's definitely going to be a living document. My question to ISPA is there appetite in the dispute resolution processes that you currently already give us as ISPs to potentially get involved in disputes around F&Os and possibly the transfer processes from one F&O to another F&O?
That is another question I can not even begin to answer. I'm not immersed enough in the processes, honestly. Sorry, you go again.
So you mean more than the extent we already are, because ISPA's complaints team's handling 1,600 complaints a year from your most angry customers, because they've got to be really angry to find out that there's an industry body that will deal with their complaints. No, I mean, I'm not kidding. I don't know whether if Charles is in the room, but poor Charles has to deal with ISP's angriest customers every single day and try and use the mediation process to resolve disputes. So he does, and the team does deal with these kind of line disputes all the time and has to try and get the parties involved to agree on how to handle it. But I think you're suggesting, is there a more formal role specifically when it comes to disputes? No idea. I'm not sure if that's something ISPA wants to invest energy into, whether it's necessary, but it's definitely an idea worth considering.
Something I can add to that. I've actually considered lodging a code of conduct complaint against another member once because I could not get any traction through the correct channels, and I ended up not doing it because I thought it would have seemed really, really petty. Since I'm not looking at my problem as a consumer, but as a business customer of that entity. Now, I mean, other people can tell me whether a code of conduct would have helped me there or not. But that does feel to me like a last resort if we're going to have to formally resolve complaints. I have a question at this point to the room, and there are representatives of the F&Os here, and you have been very quiet. Is there anyone from one of the F&Os who actually want to comment on what's been said or want to ask a question? Okay, amazing crickets. Right, more comments, suggestions, questions? Okay, I think then we've exhausted the topic for now. Sorry, I've lost my notes. So.
There we go. Okay, so I am now standing between you and lunch, and I'm going to be presenting to you the results of ISPA's February 2024 F&O Perception Survey. Before I do that, just to encourage you, if you have not read our best practice document, please ask us for a copy, have a read through, can probably get through it in 10 minutes if you read quickly. So what is our F&O perception survey? We did a early version in March 2023. It was open to anyone. It was a public survey. You could go and fill it in. We rebranded it as specifically as a perception survey and ran it using the ISPA member portal in August 2023. And we've just repeated it again in 2024. Essentially, ISPs are asked to rate 34 different fiber networks on 11 different criteria on a scale of 0 to 10. Some FNOs, in fact the majority of those FNOs are rated by a small number of ISPs because they operate in limited areas or they don't have a lot of ISPs. And we tend to comment only on the ones that get more than about 10 responses. But we do publish the full results. You can go and look at the August results, no matter what size FNO you are. If you've got any ratings at all, you can go and look at the results on our website. And we will publish the results from February next week. There we go. So, overall number of responses. In August, we had 48 ISPs that provided 276 ratings. That meant they rated an average of 5.7 FNOs each. Last month we had 50 ISPs, so more responded, but they rated slightly fewer, about 4.7 each. I'm not sure whether that means ISPs are more focused on using specific FNOs or whether they're just a little bit tired of having to do ratings. This is how many ratings we got for the networks. OpenServe, 29 ratings, most ISPs, followed by DFA, 28. And looking at the bottom there, we've got 9 ratings for Link. Liquid jumped up. We didn't have as many as 9 last time. And really interesting for me, Vodacom came in with 9 ratings, even though it's incredibly difficult to try and sell any services on Vodacom's network as an ISP, but still 9 ratings. Vodacom didn't rate very well. Probably that some of those were protest ratings about how difficult it is to sell the services. So, first of all, quick run through what the metrics are and how they changed. We're going from highest average rating across the top 9. Technical proficiency, reliability, and friendliness of staff. Those are the top 3 rated average. It's kind of good to know. The views of the ISPs is that FNOs are generally pretty technically proficient, generally pretty reliable, and the friendliness of staff is good. We did see that on average everything except open access principles dropped slightly from August to February. Open access, maybe our best practice recommendations are having some impact, but that climbed slightly to 6. At the bottom end of the scale, we see 3 things. Optimism that a particular FNO will improve, not looking good. 5.5, down 0.3. Support, pet peeve. ISPs do not feel well supported by FNOs. It's sitting at 5.4, it dropped. And the lowest is the likelihood that as an ISP, I will recommend this particular FNO to another ISP. That's bottom of the scale, 5.3 on the average. Right, let's have a look at individual networks. Mixed news for DFA. DFA score really well on open access. You see, 7. It's the only 7 score. This is the February thing, 7.5. So, the Mazif people in the room, if you're looking at a better model to follow, DFA scores really well on open access compared to some of the other bits of that structure. So have a look at what DFA's business model is. Unfortunately, not doing so well at the bottom there in terms of reliability and support. With a 3.5 on support, that is not a great score to have. I think we can all hope and be optimistic that DFA will improve some of those scores and maybe be our most improved in 6 months' time. We shall see. Frogfoot, not great news for Frogfoot either. Everything was down slightly, not as much as some of the networks, but we're seeing here at the bottom one, value sitting at 4.3. Clearly over the last 6 months, the perception of the value that ISPs get from Frogfoot has dropped. Link Africa scored really well. Everything went up. Support, 6.8, that's great, but look at all those 7s. 7 is a pretty good score in the scale of things. Link Africa scoring great on technical, reliability, business process, value. Open access, 7.9 on open access. Clearly that's another good model to look at if you want to be running an open access model. What is Link Africa doing? Liquid didn't get enough ratings in our August survey for us to comment on them, but they are our most improved on the list. Interestingly, promoting went up 2.2 on the score. That means more ISPs are doing business with Liquid and are more likely to recommend doing business to Liquid to other ISPs. A little work to be done in terms of business processes and software systems there, because they're sitting at 4, but that is already an improvement over 6 months ago. Metro Fiber had two things drop: value and reliability down a little bit, but still very respectable, 6.9, 6.7. Metro Fiber clearly have great staff. 7.9 is almost an A. That's very difficult. None of these scores are 8s, so 7.9 is really good. That's also improved. And business processes up 7.4, technical 7.5. This is pretty good scores. Metro Fiber, you should be patting your staff on the back. Octatel fairly stable. We see a little bit of an increase in a few things, a little bit of a decrease in some. Oddly enough, Optimism is the one that dropped the most. People, maybe because of some of the last-minute price increase notices, Octatel dropped a little bit in the Optimism, but still scores very well. Communication staff, technical support, and reliability. Still very respectable scores overall. OpenServe has not fared well in the last 6 months. They're still doing well on open access. Reliability 7.9 is an excellent score. So if you have an existing OpenServe circuit, the reliability of that is apparently very good. But it's a struggle to get new services right now. Business processes, software systems, and Optimism all down by 1.5 points into the 5s. OpenServe were our highest scorer in August. They are no longer our highest scorer. There is work to be done here if you are OpenServe. Last one on the list. Vumatel has also not fared particularly well. You can see downward arrows for all of these things, and there are 4 scores sitting in the 4s at this point. Support, value, communications, and the likelihood of promoting. Support and communications are an area that you can invest more in improving it. Vumatel, please communicate better and provide better support to your ISPs, and these scores are bound to go up. Overall scores. This is what the scoreboard for these top 8 looked like in August. OpenServe number 1 with 7. Octatel and Metro Fiber were tied at 6.8. Frogfoot 6.3. Vuma 6. Link Africa 5.9. DFA 5.8. Liquid we didn't include in the ranking, but I've included what it was here, 4.7, because we have now added Liquid. This is what the scores look like in February. Metro Fiber is now in top place with 6.9. Congratulations to Metro Fiber, up from 2nd place. Link Africa, the biggest mover in terms of the list, up from 6th place to 2nd with 6.8. Well done to Link Africa. Octatel holding very respectably in there. It was Metro Fiber and Octatel were tied at 2nd place. Octatel's gone down slightly, but still very respectable, 6.3. OpenServe, the biggest mover down from 1st to 4th, but still with a 6.1 on average. Liquid up from 8th place, the biggest improvement, 1.2. And then we see Frogfoot, Vuma, and DFA all moving down a little bit from 4th, 5th, and 7th place to 6th, 7th, and 8th. Those are the results. We're now going to play a little bit of a game. Yes, congratulations to all of the FNOs. It is perception, so this is what the ISPs think of you. It's not necessarily how your network is actually performing, but we hope it's still useful feedback to get. We're going to play a little game of Guess the FNO. Answers will not be provided. You're going to be left guessing. But we did something different for this survey. We had a little box at the end that said, what one piece of feedback would you like to provide for this operator? And in the words of someone who filled it in, this was a really cathartic addition to add to this survey. So what did we get? It's nice to be able to write something that you think someone's going to read. And we do intend to give these results, every word, to any FNO that wants it from us. We will happily share this feedback. So let's have a look at these. And what struck me about these, we're going to look at a few examples anonymized, is the difference you get. So we have here, going backwards rapidly has taken a turn for the worse, and then far better than any other FNO in South Africa. This illustrates very clearly the value of a good account manager, because you can bet that the first 2 on this list had a very different account manager for the 3rd one on this list. Again, here we see, not great news, support needs vast improvements. Worse news, support is terrible. Great news, support is improved. All from the same survey for the same member. This one, The second and third one, that juxtaposition, a great relationship. Next person, I'm giving up on them. Again, account managers make an enormous difference here. Wonder if you can guess which F&O this is. I can't remember which one it is. I mix them up quite a lot, so I don't remember. But honestly, this list could apply to any F&O in the right circumstances. It really could. Fourth one. This is the last one I put up for now. This one I put up because I really liked that second piece. They really try. I thought that was it was complimentary. I want to do business with a company that really tries, but at the same time, there's a little bit of unspoken, if they really try, it implies they're not always succeeding. So if I'm doing business with that company, I want them because they try, but at the back of my mind thinking, I'm going to experience some glitches because they have to try rather than succeed. But I like this. This was, I thought, was a good compliment. That is it. Some final comments. This is a perception survey. It measures how ISPs perceive the fiber network operators. Everyone understands the metrics differently. It is just a measure of people's perception. That means it's limited, but despite the limitations, we believe that these are a useful assessment of how ISPs see the fiber network operators, and more importantly, it's going to be interesting to see how that perception varies over time. We do intend to keep repeating this survey, and we'll see who goes up, who's go down, and which aspects of their businesses change. If you are an F&O, any one of the 34 that we did stats on, and you would like copies, full results of how people scored you, please send mail to Secretariat at ISPA with that subject line. And once we've recovered from the conference next week, we will happily send you the full breakdown of everything we have from our members on that. And finally, thanks to all of the ISPA members who took the time to provide their ratings. We realize that it takes some time. Hopefully it's a little bit cathartic to do it. But we appreciate you doing that, because without those we cannot keep measuring how the F&Os are performing and provide that feedback. We will be repeating the survey again probably in about 6 months' time in 2024. And there's a bonus couple if you want to have some guesses for this one. Yeah, that one's hard to guess, although maybe please fix the short outages might give you a hint. And then this one I like. Stop trying to fool us with increasing the speed and then increasing the prices. Again, that could apply to a large number of F&Os. And we are done. Thank you very much. Happy to take one or two questions, but there is lunch, so if there are no questions, we can go straight to lunch. Anybody have any questions? I see Alan. You running to lunch or running to the microphone? Running to the microphone.
Because it's only, this survey is only as good as the number of ISPs that participate in it. So thanks to everybody for participating in this. I think this is, it's really amazing. It's coming along quite nicely. I wanted to have a note of thanks to the F&Os who were brave enough to have panelists up here earlier. It was, we invited more F&Os than there were panelists, so it is brave of you. I know, I really do know how shy the F&Os can be to sit in a room filled with ISPs and have to answer difficult questions, because it's a difficult business to be in. We thank you for being here, even if you weren't in the panel, but you're here in the audience participating. Thank you. We would like to talk more to you. We are all part of the same value chain, and we appreciate your participation in the event. Thank you. No more questions. There is lunch. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.